cracking straight into it. Sail trim. So we're just going to give a little bit of theory. Hopefully most of you know the general theory. It's kind of one of those topics which you can discuss, well, like in most of sailing really, you can just discuss until you run out of BS. And there's just so much to discuss, but we're trying to simplify it to make it as understandable as possible, because there's lots of it which people kind of think they understand, and then when you are asked to explain it to someone else, you kind of think, well, actually, I don't really know how to explain that in a simple fashion. And that's what I've come up against when Rob's been Rob's been doing a lot of the work into prepping this session. So we're going to do a bit of theory and then discuss the head sails. Only jibs and genoas. We're not going to discuss spinnakers because we figured that just would add too much to one little session. And then we're going to go on to the mainsail and the mystic arts behind that. Mm-hmm. So the general theory is, you probably, if you did your dinghy levels, you probably heard the terms laminar and turbulent flow chucked in there, just to sound fancy. But basically, what we're trying to do is we're trying to create an aerofoil with the sail, and so you can see that the top diagram here has got a successful aerofoil in the fact that the wind has attached itself around the outside edge, the leeward edge of the sail or the wing, as well as the bottom edge. In the bottom picture, you can see how the camber of the sail is so aggressive that the wind around the outside edge is becoming detached and then is becoming turbulent, which is going to be producing drag. Going to stall the sail. If that was a plane, it's going to, I don't think it's necessarily going to fall out of the sky, but it's not going to be flying efficiently. And if it's a sail, you're not going to be sailing as efficiently, because just in case you're not aware, that basically a wing and a sail are the same principles, just turn 90 degrees. So rather than a plane being lifted, a plane gets lifted up into the air, whereas a yacht gets sort of sucked up towards, past across the wind. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And so basically,
fundamentally, just Rory, it's about 80% of the sail that you get the flow attached, but it's just the vortices, the turbulence starts at the back end generally, and that's the bit you're trying to avoid, where the drag starts. That's all I was going to say.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Otherwise, we just get complicated. We don't have the time.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, the back edge, or the back third of the sail, where the leech is generally where you get most of your power, a lot of your power from, where the wind leaves the sail. So if the front edge isn't as happy as the back edge, that's not really the end of the world. As long as the back edge, the leech is happy, then on the whole you're not going to have as big an impact on your.
There's an argument to say, well, the only reason you have a front end of the sail is just to keep it to attach to the mast, because it doesn't really do anything. It's the back end that does all the work.
Oh, heavy lifting, yeah. Okay, so yeah. I can't remember what the order we're going on here. I can't remember.
Yeah, so on the head sail, as Rory said, we're just going to do the genoa or the jib. We've got 4 primary controls. So we'll be looking at the sheet tensions. There are others, but these are the ones we're going to deal with because they're the main ones that we've got. Sheet tension, the halyard tension, the lead position, and the forestay tension. So starting on the sheet tension. Obviously, the sheet tension very much depends on, like a lot of things with sailing, is your wind speed. We often see sails that are oversheeted. And it's often a good place to start as well, is setting your head sail. I know we often put the main up first, but then when that's done, you get your head sail up, then set that first, and then we can work on the mainsail afterwards. So it's quite a nice place to start. So set it for speed first and then pointing. So don't use your spreader tips as a reference and your shroud bases. You often see people that they've marked their shrouds up with, their spreaders up with tape as a reference point. for where your jib is. But a sort of good rule of thumb is that to bring it in as you look up, similar distance from the shroud base to the spreaders is a good sort of starting point. So relatively loose after tack. So after you've tacked, don't crank it all the way in. Just leave it a little bit of tension out of the headsail. Get the speed up. Get somebody to call the numbers up, and then you can just wind it in over the last bit. Don't over trim the sail in light airs. You want to encourage a little bit of airflow across the sail, so a slightly slacker sail, so a little bit off your normal medium range tension, just a little bit slacker, keeping it off the spreaders and the shrouds a little bit. Tighter in flat water as well, because you don't need to have that extra draft or depth in the sail to drag you through the waves, as we've spoken about in an earlier session. Certainly in inland waters or on the river, potentially you can have the head sail in tighter. Another important thing to do is you've got to mirror the sails. So often you've got one sail, the head sail trimmed for height and the mainsail trimmed for speed. You want to match the two of them. Whatever sail set you've got on your head sail, you need to marry it up with the main. And the telltales, we talk about the telltales a lot. Do we use them? It's the outside one that's quite important. You know, if we can get them flying parallel, then you know you've got your sail set nicely, or the boat's heading in the right direction. But they're used more for upwind sail than reaching, because they tend to fall away a bit more on the reaching. Happy with that? Okay.
Cool. So halyard tension. So again, this is always a few variables in here. So for the newer sails, you just want to have enough halyard tension so that you've got no creases and wrinkles in it. But then as your sail ages, basically you need to be gradually increasing the amount of tension you put on it. Ideally, if you've got a Cunningham or a downhaul on your boat, then you just want to put a little bit of tension on your halyard, and then you want to be doing the fine tuning. So you want to put your halyard tension to get it up to probably the loosest setting you'd be using it on. So for however you've got your sail for your downwind setting, if you've got a Cunningham with a lot of flexibility, or usability in it, so that it can release and pull on quite a large amount of sail. Oh, please, sorry, 0.1C. Please, could you say a bit more? Oh, was that on the last one, Penny? Well,
yeah.
Relatively loose after tacks. So just to come back to that question, so I might as well. So basically, when you've gone through a tack on the previous question, sorry to miss that question earlier. If you go through a tack and you immediately set your sail really hard and as if you were going at full speed, it's going to take you a lot longer to accelerate. So if you can, and after you come through a tack, pull your sail in 90% of the way, and then let the boat will accelerate quite quickly. And then as you speed up, you can then grind it on that last 10%. And as you do that, the helm can then start pointing as high as they were before the tack. Okay, that's what we mean by that section.
Penelope. Or was it Penny?
Penelope, yeah. Oh, there we go.
Can I just ask is that the bit you wanted clarifying?
Yeah, she said thank you on the chat. Is that?
Oh, yeah, yes. Got it.
She's typing.
Thanks,
She's typing away.
Cool.
Okay, cool. So so back to the halyard tension. So if you've got the you set your halyard so that you've got the sail as loose as you'd like it for your downwind leg, and then you use your Cunningham for the adjustments. If you don't have a Cunningham, then obviously you've got to do a bit more with your halyards.
Hang on, Rory, we're still talking about a head sail.
We are, aren't we?
Yeah.
So head sail. Some head sails, if you're on the advanced racier boats, you may have an adjustable ram under the forestay. That's what I meant there. But if you don't have an adjustable hydraulic ram to pull your Cunningham on your head sail down, then you're just going to be using your halyard tension to adjust your jib tension. So pulling the crinkles out, and then once you start, if you're in heavier winds, so by increasing the halyard tension, you're going to be increasing the draft, the camber on the sail. So you're going to be giving it a harder, more as you bring it on, more curve, and you're also going to be shifting that curve, the center of effort forwards. So you can see here in Rob's beautiful diagram, as you bring on the tension, the deepest point of the sail is going to be moving forward towards the luff. And so this is, good, has pros and cons. It is going to, in heavier winds, it's good because it's going to give you quite a good, a deeper sail and help you punch through waves a little bit better. In lighter winds, it's not so good because it's going to mean that the angle of attack, so to speak, of the shape, the angle of the luff of the sail is going to be quite hard, and so basically your ability to point upwind is going to be hindered by having too much tension on. Okay, but yeah, on the whole, it's going to move the camber forward. It makes it easier to steer by moving the center of effort forwards. Okay, so it's going to be kind of helping you control the bow a bit better. Gets you through chop, and it flattens off the back of the sail. So as that center of effort moves forwards, the back end of the sail becomes flatter, and so it's going to open up the leach of the sail and allow it to escape, allow the you to spill a bit more wind. Is that more or less on key for you there, Rob?
Yeah.
So the other things we can do is adjusting the lead position. So car position, lead position. It's basically the perfect car angle and sheet angle and lead position, all the same thing really. Onto the sail is so that it's at 45 degrees. So you always say, oh, you want it to be at 45 degrees, but exactly what you mean is 45 degrees. So this line here is the center of the sail, okay, and so it's a 45 degree angle from the clew up to the leading edge, the luff of the jib, at that midpoint there.
But that's just a rule of thumb. That's your starting point, if you like.
General rule of thumb. And so what you're trying to get basically is even amounts of tension. You want that sheet to be pulling evenly between the leech and the foot. Yeah. And it's quite easy to spot quite quickly. By looking at a sail, you can generally quite quickly spot if you're slightly imbalanced in that. Because if you look up the leech and you see it's really hooked and your foot is really loose, okay, then we know. Anyone want to hazard a guess if we've got quite a curve in our foot and a closed leech? Is our car too far forwards or too far backwards? Ooh, anyone fancy that one?
Too far forwards.
Too far forwards. Yes, that's exactly. And so we don't generally want to ever move the car forwards. Apart from maybe a tiny bit in the lighter breeze, just to put a little bit more curve. When you think of it's the trade-off between tighter luff, giving you a flatter sail, and moving the camber forward, giving you a bigger angle of attack. Now, wait, Rob, I'm going to leave you to think about that question while can you see that? Can you see the chat, Rob?
Yeah, just got it.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to carry on. And so. Yeah, so if you're sailing with a head sail and you're reaching or you're heading downwind, that's when you move your car forwards as well. Because as you're releasing the clew forwards, you also want to move the car forwards with it. But if we're overpowered, if we're sailing in heavier winds, we can move the car back slightly, and what that's going to do is flatten the sail off. It's kind of the same as tensioning the outhaul on the mainsail. You give a very tight foot, and it's going to open the leech and allow us to spill a bit of extra power, okay, to depower the sail.
You still end up with a fairly flat sail. It just because with a tighter halyard, whilst you're drawing the camber or the draft of the sail forward to give you more power to drive the boat through a chop, for instance, it's flattening the majority of the sail, if that makes sense. Yeah, so you're still getting a lot of power, drive out of the back of the sail. And when you move the, if you're getting to the point where you are getting overpowered, if you bring, as Rory just said, the car back a little bit, it'll open up the leach slightly, which will allow some of that air to exhaust out, just depowering it slightly. There's always a trade-off, sort of going to Andrew's question, but fundamentally, you want to set your sail so the draft is 40 to 45% of the way forward in most conditions, up to sort of 3 or 4, anything above that. In lighter conditions, you're going to have it slightly looser, but this is also affected by older and newer sails, because you'll have it probably looser on a newer sail than you will on an older sail, because the sailcloth stretches at the load areas on an older sail, and it shrinks on the low load areas on an older sail. So it's really just setting it. But fundamentally, it's tighter when it's choppy or windy, because that will bring the draft forward but flatten the back of the sail. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So you're still getting that drive through the water and a fine entry.
Cool. Lovely job. All right then. Forestay tension.
Okay. Wow. So going back to my next little natty drawing. On boats that certainly don't have roller reefing, you have a bottle screw on the front. So you can look at, we mentioned this a couple of days ago, I think, or a couple of sessions ago. You can tighten the forestay tension. So whilst you can also tighten the halyard tension, you can tighten the forestay tension. So if it's going to be a windy day, you want the halyard a little bit tighter. So you've got your base setting, and you can wind on 6 or 8 turns, and this will tighten up the forestay. So at least when your sail's going up the tough luff, you can put the tension within the halyard. You can match it with a tight forestay as well, rather than a saggy forestay. A saggy forestay, a lighter one, that you can wind it off in lighter breezes, because we mentioned about inducing some sag into the sails, because then that is encouraging some airflow across it in lighter breezes. So this is tightening it, as you can see in the drawing, will also bring the camber of the sail forward, which is a preferable option for the sail shape. So it's certainly better being forward 45, 50, more than 50 degrees, so greater than 50% forward. It gives you a slightly open leach, can depower the sail, and creating a wider sailing groove. The other option for that is the backstay, but doesn't work so well if you've got a fractional rig. But we'll talk about that in a minute.
Does that answer your question, Peter? Cool. Yep, cool. Happy days. Okay, so that's the end of our jib head sail trimming. So now onto the mainsail, which again we're going to run over our 1 o'clock deadline, I believe. But hey ho, no worries if you have. Does having a slightly looser impact forestay have an impact on pointing?
Yes.
Yeah, you're trying to get every bit of speed. You want to have that loose forestay when the winds are very light, and so it's more important. You're looking to get as much.
You're going for speed rather than pointing there.
Yeah.
So yes, it will.
So
you've got to commit really on that day, Andrew. That's the thing. You won't be able to adjust it when you're sailing. It's not allowed for starters. You certainly in class racing. So you look at the breeze. It's going to be light. Wind some off. You're not going to be pointing as high. If it's going to be windy, you're going to wind it on. But if you've got 2 or 3 races in that day, it's set for the day. That's it. But yes, it will impact you on your pointing slightly.
Cool. So I thought mainsail. Yeah, mainsail is a bit of the mystic art of how to trim a mainsail. There's on a few topics it's a bit controversial. There's various schools of thought. I just noticed that picture is we've cut off the boom at the bottom there, but I'll sort that out. But but yeah, so we've got our 6 primary controls. The main
over-trimmed at thank you one sails.
Thank you one sails indeed. Well, we included their logo in there just to say thank you very much. Yeah, the kicker, vang, your luff tension, your outhaul, and the backstay. Okay, so basically the overriding rule of thumb for a happy mainsail is that you've got a decent mainsail will have all the telltales up the leach. Okay, if you don't have any of those, then that hinders your ability to tell how well trimmed it is. I'm sorry, I've got someone at the door. Cheers. And where was I? Yeah, so you want to be able to have those telltales. The more of them up, the better, because you can just see every part of the sail and see how happy it is. And then the top telltale, ideally you want to be showing probably about 60% of the time, and then just flicking around the back the rest of the time. Just every now and then, and that just lets you know you've got it trimmed just perfectly on the edge, basically. And then the other rule of thumb is as you look up your sail. You've basically got the top batten, and the top batten on the whole, you want to have. Sorry, no one knocks on doors these days. What's going on? You've got the top batten, which you want to be parallel with the boom, and so you can see here in the top 2 photos, it's not too bad. Yeah, your top. You've got a slightly more. You've got a much more sort of curved sail there in the top shot, and then the middle one, it's been flattened off slightly with more
dropped way to leeward in the sort of middle one a bit. So it's an open.
Oh, it's an open one. Oh yeah, so it's actually bending off a bit. So potentially you've cranked on a bit more backstay, and so you're just trying to bend out that top batten a bit to try and spill some air. So maybe that's how you'd have your mainsail looking if you're overpowered. And then the bottom photo, on the whole, you don't really ever want the battens hooked to windward, I would say. Would you disagree?
You do sometimes see that in some sort of racing class or racing boats. If you just want to hook it up, maybe in slightly lighter weather, for instance, it might be more beneficial to get a little more lift, and you'll slow down rather than tack to make a mark. Potentially you can really crank the main on.
Okay, yeah.
Just hooks it a little bit, and it gives you slightly more lift. It's not fast, but it might be better than doing 2 tacks.
Yeah, or maybe climbing out of the wind shadow of someone.
Yeah,
something like that.
So there is an option there for using that.
Cool. So, right, what else to go? So basically, we use all of these controls we use to try and get these sail shapes, basically. So, the main sheet is primarily, the job of the main sheet is ideally to pull the sail up and down, in and out, and the kicker is lifting the boom up and down. The main sheet, once the main sheet is above the center point, if you crank in this main sheet any more than that, it's only going to be pulling it down, which is basically doing the same job as the kicker. And so in that situation, you might be better off just using the traveller instead, rather than trying to just pull the boom down towards the deck any further.
Yeah, so just sort of use the main sheet to set your sail in a nice position. So I take over on the traveller?
Yeah, you go for it,
yeah. So yeah, you set your main, you've got it sort of set up in the first picture, if you like, if you're happy with that on a sort of normal day between up to first force 3 to 4. And as the wind picks up, you're going to then be playing. There's 2 schools of thoughts on this, but I'll give you the traveller one now. And then you'll set the trap. Then you'll play the mainsail on the traveller in as the gusts come in. But also in lighter winds, you'll set the traveller up to windward, and then ease the main off down to the centre line, because then that will give you a nice sort of twist off on the top of the sail. Because again, you want a little bit of to encourage the wind flow across the back, not too much because then it stalls, but just to encourage the wind across the sail. As the wind picks up, you'll crank on the main, close the top of the leacher for a little bit initially, and then you can just play it on the traveller. As it picks up again, then you've got to balance then. Do you ease the main on the sheet, or do you just dump it down on the traveller? You don't want a flogging main, so it's really a balance. You can potentially have a backing main, where it starts to back a bit, but the back end of the main, so there's sort of trailing third of the mainsail, the leech, you're driving off of that, so it's not flogging. So there's a bit of a balancing act. You can close the slot on it if you put this traveller down to leeward, which is slower, but at least your main's not flogging. So there's two sort of schools of thought there, really. Hope that makes sense. Another area you can talk about for hours.
Yeah, indeed.
So Rory mentioned about the bang and the kicker, but often when you're going up winds, if you've got a tightly sheeted in main, the bang's almost doing nothing. You can just snug it up, really, just so it's not flapping around. But do remember that you need to release it when you get to a windward mark, because it'll allow the boom to go out, but not take any of the power out the mains. You might not be able to ease to change course, so you can put it on after you've got around the corner.
Yeah, just like relating to for those of you who've ever sailed a laser and you get to the windward mark and you're trying to bear away and you've got the tiller hard towards you and you're letting your main out, but it's not the boat won't actually bear away. It's just because you just need to release a little bit of kicker just to allow the power to escape a bit from the sail, which allows the bow to come down. So the same thing happens on yachts, really.
It also puts a massive amount of tension if you don't release it and you just ease the main out on the gooseneck. That's just an aside, but it does.
So the luff tension, again, we've kind of discussed the luff tension. The general rules with the main luff are a lot of them apply to the jibs and the headsails. Apart from what the jib doesn't have is, well, I suppose we talked about the backstay. So linking 4 and 6 together here a bit is that when you crank on the backstay, you're tensioning the forestay, which is stretching the luff of the jib, and you're bending the mast, which is increasing the length of the mast and the distance that the sail has to go. So you're also basically, the backstay does multiple things, and one of those is also it basically tensions the luff of both sails at the same time.
Anybody? A general question: who uses a Cunningham?
And who uses
all
a downhaul?
Of you, of course, if you've got one. It's a very useful bit of kit.
On a dinghy, yeah.
Well, very useful to have on a big boat as well.
Yeah, much quicker to react. You don't have to put it on a winch, and a lot of the time. So ideally, you've just got yourself on a lot of boats, they tend to have just a kind of a temporary hooked, like a handy billy up at the mast. So once you've hoisted your mainsail, you clip your downhaul, your Cunningham on, and then normally that's the job of someone like at the mast or the bow when you're racing. If it's not led back to the cockpit, so you can just really quickly ease it on and ease it off and crank it back on again, and it's much quicker than getting the pit off the rail into the cockpit, get the halyard on the winch, grind it on, ease it off, etc.
Yeah.
Outhaul. So the outhaul is a good one. So the general rule of thumb is that you want to have a more curved, more an eased outhaul in the lighter breeze and downwind, and as the wind picks up, you bring your outhaul on tighter. There is a couple of situations where that's not the case. So if you've got extremely light winds, Rob and I were just discussing earlier, so it's just basically if you've got very light winds, we're talking sort of around the 5 knot mark, 5-6 knots or less, and you're trying to do everything to make your sail give you some power. You do actually want to have a relatively flat sail, because if you've got too much of a curved sail, you're not going to have the wind isn't strong enough to actually be effective and make it the whole way across that sail. So by flattening the sail off with the outhaul, it just encourages the air to pass over the entire sail and will give you a little bit more bit more drive and power. It is a fine-tuning act of plenty of fiddling when you get to that. Those kind of light winds are where it really kind of, you can see a difference in the fleet. If you've got a fleet of boats, you'll notice the people who can handle it, who can keep the boat moving in 4 or 5 knots of wind, versus those who are just kind of left for dead. And it's a much harder skill than managing a boat in strong winds on the whole, which generally just comes down to crew coordination and survival.
I'd just like to say as well, Rory, that on the outhaul, there's a couple of schools of thoughts as well on the downwind bit, where you slacken it right off. But there's quite a good argument to say that you want to show as much sail to the wind as possible. So if you keep a tighter outhaul on, then you might be increasing the amount of sail that you actually show to the wind.
Yeah.
So it's kind of 2 schools of thoughts there, rather than a big baggy sail to sort of collect whatever you're going to get, or just increasing slightly the amount of sail that you actually show to the wind with the outhaul.
Yeah.
2 schools of thoughts.
Yeah. And we're not going to tell you which one's right because we're still trying to work it out.
No. Okay, the backstay.
Backstay, yeah. So backstay is kind of like it's something on different kinds of boats. Sometimes you trim the backstay more or as much as you trim anything else in the main sheet position. As a gust's about to hit, you might crank on the backstay a bit, and so what you're going to be doing is you're going to be bending that mast back, and so you're basically reducing the distance between the end of the boom and the top of the mast, and so therefore the leech is going to open slightly. But then you're also stretching the sail up, and so you're going to be flattening the sail off, especially the front portion of it, and so you're going to give yourself a nice de-power, and also in tandem with tensioning the forestay to help you point higher and de-power the jib in that gust as well. So on the whole, backstay is used as it gets windy. As you get to the stage of being slightly, as you're being fully powered up, is where you start really using your backstay. I don't know, do you use much backstay at all in the light winds, Rob?
No, not as much. No, because you want a fuller sail.
Yeah, you want to keep it.
I mean, just as the wind starts to increase, the tension on the backstay starts to increase.
And then, yeah.
And whilst it does have an effect on the forestay, on a fractional rig, it's not as much, obviously, as a masthead rig, which has a big effect on the forestay tension as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, more as the wind comes up to flatten that sail out.
Cool.
Okay.
I think that's about that, isn't it? Isn't that the end? Yeah.
I think so.
That finishes off the sail trimming. Have we got any other questions? But just if you're typing a question, well, I'm just going to say, the next session. So we're going to cover tacking and jibing. So for a bit of manoeuvres, and then the race practice. I think my current plan is to do some. I'm going to see if I can get a little bit of practice in on the virtual coastal skipper racing and see if we think that's going to be any value. And if it is, well, if it's not, it might just be jolly good fun. And in which case, if you find yourself with half an hour to spare, why not give it a crack? Because I've just had a quick go. But basically, you have to go through the demo and the practice rounds, which teaches you the rules and how it all works. And then you can just basically bung out onto a race course in a 49er, a hydrofoiling F50, or a NACRA 17. I think I quite like the look of, I have to say.
I'm going to have to sign up at our club who are doing it every Tuesday. Get some practice in, I think.
And so, so a race won't start until you've got enough people in it. So what we could do is we could coordinate joining the same race, and then that could be quite fun. But anyway, next Thursday, I'll plan on giving a little demo run of that if you fancy it, and see if I can make it useful and relevant towards all the stuff we've covered. But next Tuesday will be tacking and jibing. Otherwise, thanks very much.
Well, I hope that went well for people, and it gave you a little bit of an insight into it. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
See you all again soon.
Yes.
Thanks a lot. See you later.